Okay, Chapter 10's homework is primarily looking at the positive and negative externalities that take place in the market. And just as a quick reminder, that implies there's been a market failure. There's an externality. So when we talk about externalities, that means we either have a benefit or a cost of a certain activity that spills over to parties not directly involved in the activity. So basically, you do something and it either has a positive impact on someone or it imposes a loss on someone. And when that happens, that's known as positive and negative externalities. And if we as individuals or firms as individuals aren't taking into account these benefits or these costs they're imposing on other people when they engage in the behavior, it's going to cause either too much or too little production of a good or service. So negative externalities are costs that are imposed on others. So that is talking about a supply curve, because supply are costs, your demand curve is your benefit. So when we talk about negative externalities, what it means is that the private supply curve, our individual supply curve, will be different than what a society as a whole wants. So when we as an individual take into account the behavior that we're going to engage in, we're only going to consider ourselves. But the problem is, or our private costs, but the problem is there's this externality, this cost, this extra cost, so that's like a supply shift to the left. There's an extra cost that we impose on a bunch of other people. So society's supply curve, this curve right here, is higher up, or than is our own private cost curve. So what ends up happening is privately, we don't take into account the costs we impose on others, we're going to end up producing right here. But society says, hey, look, you're imposing this cost to us. We actually are fine with having this amount in the market rather than this amount. So that would be like if you were a smoker. A positive externality, on the other hand, is a benefit that we give to somebody. So that impacts demand curve. Because demand, another way of thinking of demand is that it's a benefit curve. So we end up having two demand curves, if you like. We have a demand curve for the individual, the private benefit curve, and then we have this demand curve for society, or society's benefit curve, where we've actually included not only the benefits we get as an individual, but that society gets or reaps from whatever we're doing. For example, going to school. Not only do we benefit from going to school, but society as a whole benefits because we have a more educated labor force now. So what happens is we as individuals would decide how much schooling we want to have, which would be where our demand and supply intersect. So we find that society says we want more education than what the individual on their own would do. So solutions for positive and negative externalities are the following. When we have a negative externality, the most common way to try and impact that, so let me just go back to the negative, is to tax. So that's the general solution for negative externalities. We want to tax the person so they include that cost they're imposing on others. And for positive externalities, what we tend to do is we tend to subsidize the cost to ensure that that person incorporates that benefit. So with that all in mind, let's take a look at some of this homework. So in the first questions, you're told that a person has two ways of commuting or going back and forth, let's say, to a city. They can either take public transportation, which in this case is talking about, you might take the bus or the subway, or the bus, or they could drive their own car. So what this question is trying to get you to think about would be which of these two things would be the positive and which would be kind of more the negative. So if people take public transportation, one of the nice things that happens is there's less pollution in the city because people are taking the public transportation. While on the other hand, if people are driving their own cars into the city, they're going to be creating more pollution. So I think you'll be able to figure out which one here has the positive externality and which one is the negative. Just think as positive as being beneficial, negative having that extra cost. Okay, the next question. So here you're told that fire extinguishers are positive externalities, and they tell you why they're claiming that, because they not only prevent fire from damaging your own property, but it would prevent it from the fire from spreading to others. So it's a positive externality. So with the diagrams that we just took into account earlier in this video, positive externalities are benefits, and as a reminder, that has everything to do with your demand curve. So demand are benefits, supply are costs. So the question here is if fire extinguishers are positive externalities or a benefit to others as well as yourself, what's that going to do to the demand curve? And then you're asked here, suppose the external benefit is $10 per extinguisher. So people are benefiting $10 for every extinguisher. Then you're asked, would taxing people $10 for these extinguishers be a good outcome? So think about that. If we have benefits to society, are we really wanting to tax them or are we wanting to subsidize them? So think about that when answering this question. The final question is, again, it's a couple parts, not too difficult though. The main thing that you want to do is, again, at the beginning, read what it's telling you. So it says, greater availability of alcohol leads to more motor vehicle accidents, and more drinking, more accidents. And they're saying this imposes costs on people who do not drink and drive. So they're saying in the question right off the bat, this is a cost to other people. So once again, when you come to the question and you start having to, decide what's the picture going to look like, you want to think to yourself, okay, if it's a cost to other people, is that a supply shift or a demand shift? And as a reminder, demand shifts are when we have benefits being imposed on others. Supply shifts are when costs are being imposed on others. And then I think the rest of this question is doable. I will mention dead weight loss is the difference between any time you have, when you make that shift, it's going to be the difference between where we would have been and where we end up being. So I hope that helped.